Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
We have to keep the fossil fuels in the ground. That's the only way to prevent dangerous, catastrophic levels of global warming.
Canada's new climate plan, why some say it's not tough enough on oil and gas. And a fourth dose of the COVID vaccine gets the go-ahead in the U.S. So what does it mean for this country?
Yeah, it's a real pain in the butt.
When you gotta go, you gotta go. A look at why public bathrooms are so few and far between.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Anita Bathe. The Trudeau government has unveiled its plan to dramatically cut carbon emissions over the next 8 years. The Prime Minister calls the costly plan ambitious and achievable. Anita Bathe looks at what's expected to drive Canada's transition toward net zero and some of the missing details.
It's a domestic environmental plan the Prime Minister wants to tie to a conflict half a world away in Ukraine.
I know some people will say a war is no time for climate action.
As gasoline prices continue to spike, Trudeau says there's even more reason to move away from fossil fuels.
This is no time for excuses. It is the time for even bolder climate action.
Bolder, especially when it comes to spending. $9.1 billion to reach climate targets. Some of that cash will boost incentives for people who want to buy zero-emission vehicles. Investment in more charging stations. The plan also introduces a tougher timeline for sales of electric vehicles. It will require that 1 in 5 new passenger cars be battery-operated in 4 years and reach 60% by 2030. And it will also be used to make the electricity grid cleaner. What this plan doesn't make clear is the specific hard emissions cap that will be imposed on the oil and gas sector, a sector that makes up the biggest share of Canada's carbon footprint.
We will be working with them over the coming months to ensure we put in place an appropriate cap that's going to work in a manner that will actually continue to employ people, but that will allow us to get at those emissions.
The government is projecting the oil patch can reduce emissions by 31% below 2005 levels by 2030. And there will be an increase in tax breaks for fossil fuel companies that use carbon capture technology. But details? TBA.
Simply throwing money at the problem isn't going to solve it. What we need to do is also use a wider range of tools, regulatory tools.
Canada has had at least 10 plans and set many different targets since 1988, but has never met any of them. Unlike previous climate plans, this one is legally binding, so the government has no choice but to achieve them. Anita Bathe, CBC News, Ottawa.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made a stop at David Thompson Secondary School today to speak with students in Vancouver. He took a moment to call back to his roots as a teacher here.
Next time you have a substitute teacher, be nice to them. You never know when they might show up with a motorcade filled with police officers there to back them up.
The Prime Minister was joined by the Minister of International Development, Harjit Sajjan, and the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Trudeau took questions from students and spoke on the environment and the next steps to the government taking its fight in climate change.
But it's just wonderful, and this has been a way of gathering together, looking at it.
The PM later made a stop at Cubesat Ukrainian eatery on Victoria Drive in a show of solidarity with the Ukrainian community in Canada amid ongoing Russian aggression. A warning, this next story contains graphic content and may affect those who have experienced sexual violence or know someone affected by it. A patient involved in a clinical trial of MDMA therapy is coming forward tonight. A Vancouver Island woman has filed several complaints after she was the victim of inappropriate, intimate physical contact. Bethany Lindsay is here with more on this story. Bethany, the video has prompted concerns about public safety. What was happening in these sessions?
Yeah, so this is footage from 2015. It shows psychiatrist Dr. Donna Dreyer and unlicensed therapist Richard Jensen, who are a married couple, during their second experimental session in a Health Canada-approved Phase 2 clinical trial with patient Megan Buisson in Vancouver. The trial was conducted through an organization called MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. Buisson signed up for the experimental therapy in a last-ditch effort to treat post-traumatic stress disorder related to her history of sexual abuse and assault. The footage comes from cameras that MAPS placed in the treatment room to ensure patients were safe and therapists were following the treatment protocol. But Buisson hasn't been able to watch the videos because even hearing her former therapist's voices triggers her PTSD. She has seen screenshots and had the content described to her. That includes some really intimate physical contact and a scene where Jensen is lying on top of her and holding her down as she moans in anguish. Buisson believes the public needs to know what happened here.
This is not against MDMA. This is not against a psychedelic. It's just saying that if this drug is going to be legalized and medicalized in this way, then there is a certain degree of safety and fiduciary responsibility and credibility that goes into being part of a medical system, and especially with vulnerable subjects.
And Buisson has since submitted the videos to the College of Physicians and Surgeons of BC. What's happened since then? Have there been any charges?
Yeah, so Buisson submitted the videos to the college, where she has an active complaint going against Dreyer for more than 4 years. A college spokesperson told me she couldn't comment on that investigation. MAPS has admitted that their staff didn't actually watch the video until November of last year. They've started a compliance review and say that so far it looks like Jensen and Dreyer substantially deviated from their treatment manual on several occasions. Neither Jensen nor Dreyer has responded to any of my emails or phone calls requesting comment, and Health Canada, which sponsored these trials, hasn't responded to requests for comment either. Now, Jensen is not a licensed psychologist in BC, and this province doesn't regulate therapists and counselors, so there's no official body that can investigate his actions or discipline him if it's necessary. The RCMP have also reviewed the videos after Buisson filed a sex assault complaint in 2019. And though police did recommend criminal charges, Crown prosecutors declined to approve them. In BC, the charge approval standard requires a substantial likelihood of conviction. So after all of this, Buisson says she feels like she's been let down by every system that was put in place to protect patients from harm. And she's speaking out in the hopes that others won't fall victim as well.
Bethany Lindsay reporting for us tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Anita.
Now, if you or someone you know is struggling with substance use, there are supports available. Anyone in BC can call the 24-hour mental health support line at 310-6789. No area code needed. Residents of Vancouver can reach out to VHGH's Access and Assessment Centre to connect with resources tailored to their needs. They're reachable at 604-675-3700. Now, we're learning tonight a student at Vancouver Island University in Nanaimo has suffered multiple injuries in an alleged homophobic attack that happened on Saturday. 19-year-old Spencer Frey says he and his school friend attended an off-campus party and that at separate points he was called disgusting, groped, and accused of staring, then punched in the face. He fled with a friend as multiple people tried to attack him and went to the hospital the next morning with a swollen face, black eye, and injuries to his mouth and neck.
It's disgusting, and it's literally left me traumatized in a way like where I could just get beat up for being myself.
Nanaimo RCMP are investigating but can't give any details. Frey says he's faced other verbal homophobic attacks since he first moved to Nanaimo in September. He says he's packed his bags and won't be returning to VIU next year. The family of a Port Moody woman is still waiting for justice 1 year after her body was discovered 130 kilometers from her home. Trina Hunt was reported missing from her Port Moody home last January. Her disappearance triggered a months-long investigation involving hundreds of people, all coordinated through social media. 1 year ago today, the 48-year-old's remains were found near Hope. The Integrated Homicide Investigation Team took over the case shortly after, and in June, police searched her home as well as her husband's home in Mission. There have been no updates since then. Well, the battle to be named BC's best small town continues, and every day you're getting an opportunity to vote for a winner, and already there have been plenty of surprises. Voting goes until 10 tonight for Vancouver Island. Justin McElroy breaks down what's been happening in that part of the province.
From 128 communities, we're down to just 32 as the search for BC's best small town reaches the third round. The fishing centre of Port Hardy has fans, but it's no match for the coal community of Cumberland, the spirit of Ginger Goodwin alive and well as the town looks set for a comfortable victory. Who will Cumberland face in the Sweet 16? There are plenty who like Upei, home to the world's largest totem pole, but at the moment it's Hornby Island on top. Meanwhile, on the south side of the island, there's a matchup of coastal towns, but it's not Qualicum Beach advancing, it's Yuki, the rocky town south of Tofino with a big advantage at the moment. Ucluelet looks likely to be facing Cowichan Bay next round, having vanquished all comers in the South Island portion of the competition, but with so few entries remaining, the votes will be getting tougher for everyone in the search for BC's best small town.
Johanna is off this week. Meteorologist Nick Czernkovich joins us now with the forecast. Nick, I gotta ask, is it time to re-dig out the umbrella?
You know, just for the morning, Anita. Actually, I've got some good weather in the forecast for you tomorrow as well. Today turned out pretty nice. 14 degrees is where we're sitting through the afternoon anyway. It's come down a couple degrees. But mind you, the average temperature for this time of year, about 11, 12 degrees. So above seasonal. And we had some sunshine as well. Here's a look at current temperatures across the board. 13 Cole Harbour, 12 at Vancouver Airport, Pitt Meadows at 14, Abbotsford at 14, Hope at 14 as well at this point. Now, again, some good sunshine. A little bit of high cloud cover moving in, but we didn't see that thick cloud cover sticking around from earlier this morning. Now, there is another system on the way, as I mentioned yesterday, and it's just sort of pushing up around Vancouver Island at this point. Tofino seeing a few showers earlier on. As we move through tonight, if you don't like the rain, most of it's going to fall through the overnight period. So, you know, despite the fact that we're getting rainfall, it's actually going to fall mostly through the overnight, starting later this evening, closer to about 11 p.m. Still looking at rain showers through the morning, but into the afternoon, it actually clears out, and we're expecting to see a mix of sun and cloud for the most part. Some areas up the Fraser there are still going to see rain showers through the afternoon, but the lower mainland, including Metro Vancouver, is seeing basically a mix of sun and cloud as we move through tomorrow afternoon. So the forecast then, actually not looking too bad. 6 degrees for the morning, 11 for tomorrow afternoon with a mix of sun and cloud. There is, however, more rain on the way for the end of the week. I will have that coming up in just a bit.
Okay, we will talk to you soon. Thanks, Nick.
Sounds good.
Back to our top story now, and an ambitious and costly plan to meet Canada's climate goals. It's been met with both applause and concern here in British Columbia. The province says federal funding can help reach its own emissions goals, but as John Hernandez reports, some environmentalists say planned reductions for oil and gas don't go far enough.
Just moments after his keynote speech, the Prime Minister met with BC Premier John Horgan, a show of solidarity as both levels of government pursue emissions reductions.
It looks like there's pretty much an alignment between the federal government goals and our goals.
Provincial leaders say they hope BC will see its fair share in the billions of dollars announced to support federal emissions reductions. That includes money for electric vehicle infrastructure, which is already growing alongside surging EV demand in the province.
Supporting a network right across Canada, as well as supporting our efforts in British Columbia, will all be extremely helpful.
The targeted reduction in oil and gas emissions, however, is among the most polarizing aspects of the plan, with local stakeholders saying they were caught off guard by the projected 30% cut.
That this is a goal that, although he said he's consulted with industry, it seems to have come as a surprise to a lot of players out there as to the amount and the pace of that.
A win for some environmental groups that believe the reduction is achievable if industries act now.
In order to meet those 2030 carbon pollution targets, we need to start reducing carbon tomorrow and every year until 2030.
But others aren't so optimistic. The last 12 months in BC saw a series of climate crises, including historic flooding and wildfires. With global climate reports painting an increasingly grim picture of the future, some groups think the federal government should have gone even harder on oil and gas, setting clear caps and further reductions.
When you are in a hole, you must stop digging. It's not enough to clean up the digging process. We have to keep the fossil fuels in the ground. That's the only way to prevent dangerous, catastrophic levels of global warming.
The emissions plan will be reassessed over the next 8 years, a move critics say allows the government to kick the hard decisions down the road. John Hernandez, CBC News, Vancouver.
Indigenous delegates from Canada who are in Rome for meetings with Pope Francis are calling for the repatriation of artifacts held in the Vatican's museums. Some say the items are not being treated respectfully. Others point to questions about how the church came into possession of the artifacts in the first place. Olivia Stefanovich has the details from Vatican City.
The Vatican museums are well known for the masterpieces of Italian art, but what many people may not realize is that these museums contain about 100,000 cultural belongings from Indigenous nations around the world, including Canada. First Nations, Inuit and Métis delegates meeting the Pope this week were invited to see some of these objects today at the Vatican during a private tour. And they got the chance to see a rare kayak from Western Arctic. This is from the Unveiled region, and it's said to be one of 5 of its kind in the world. It's about 100 years old, and there is great interest in repatriation. Now, the delegates also got the chance to see beaded moccasins, a baby belt, and many other cultural belongings, but there are so many more of these artifacts in the Vatican's possession and storage. And for years, Canadian researchers, Indigenous curators have tried to access these belongings to see what the Vatican has. And there's no publicly available list to identify all the cultural belongings in the Vatican's possession. But one Canadian researcher, Gloria Bell, she studied these items for nearly a decade, and she says there's a contested history here. The Vatican says most of these cultural belongings were sent in to the Pope for a 1925 Vatican exhibit, and this was to celebrate, they say, Indigenous cultures from around the world. And the Vatican claims that most of these cultural belongings were gift, but Bell says that there is evidence to suggest some of these items may have been stolen by missionaries from Indigenous nations. She says that Indigenous peoples were also working under duress to create these cultural belongings, and that there is evidence to suggest that residential school students in Canada may have sent in materials for this exhibit in 1925, and some of those materials may still be in the Vatican's possession. Now, CBC News asked for an interview with the Vatican museums to speak to the curator to see some of these artifacts firsthand. We were invited to see the objects back in December when Indigenous delegates were originally supposed to meet the Pope, but since that trip was postponed, we haven't heard back from the Vatican museums. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News, Vatican City.
For many, the trip to the Vatican is a crucial step toward addressing the role the Catholic Church played in the establishment and operation of residential schools in Canada. But for some members of the Métis community who are also of Catholic faith, the visit comes with concerns. For more on that perspective, Louis DeJagger joins me. He's the Métis Nation of BC Acting Vice President. Thanks for being with us.
Oh, thanks a lot for having me, Anita.
I know you mentioned to one of my colleagues that you're apprehensive about this trip. Can you talk about why?
Well, I just hope that we're going to get it right. I think that's, my biggest fear. So much of the Catholic faith and just faith in general, is involved in a lot of things that Métis people do. Most of us are Catholic, and we have been for many, many years. It's been our faith. It's been involved in our spirituality, our identity, our culture, our language. And, for so many years, that has been taken away by the heinous crimes that have happened to not just us, but our First Nations cousins as well.
And given all of that, how do you keep your faith strong?
I think it's, it is that core spirituality, and it's community. Really, it is. It's all about community. I'm on Stolo grounds here, and there's 24 First Nations tribes that are here as well. And in particular, one of them, Squaw, a good friend of mine, is the chief, Lara Muscle, and it really affected one of their families as well. And when the first bodies were found in Kamloops, they took two canoes up, and they were collecting the souls their children and bringing them back here. And that really affected all of us. There were many Métis people that were involved and children involved in what happened in Kamloops. We're also part of that grief, and it's part of our culture as well. And to see that almost stolen by something we trusted in so much is really, it's bothersome, and it goes on for generations. And to look back and try to rediscover or re-believe in that faith is very, very difficult for a lot of Métis people.
So what does the church need to do to help mend the relationships with Métis people?
Well, I think first of all, they need to tell the truth. You know, they really need to tell the truth. And, you know, there's a lot of things in the Vatican as well, besides the records that need to be released. There was a great article in CBC this morning, I think it was Olivia Stefanovich, about repatriation. There are many artifacts. Those are our ancestors. That is our history. And it's still being held captive by the Vatican. We need all of that returned in order to make us whole as Indigenous people again. So I think there's a lot of steps, but we want to be there to help the Vatican come to grips with what had happened and what we've gone through. And we want to do that healing with them. So, you know, a lot of people say, you know, are you expecting an apology there? I certainly hope not. I want the apology to be here. It has to be here on the grounds that the crimes actually took place on.
Yeah, we're hearing that from a lot of people. Louis de Jager is the acting vice president of the Métis Nation of BC. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
You're welcome. Chimikwich.
Word that the Russians will scale back their offensive in Ukraine, coupled with peace talks, is bringing hope to a dreadful situation. Why there are still many questions as the conflict drags on. Next. Thanks for staying with us during our commercial-free live stream. A new group in PEI has banded together to try to reduce food waste. The Food Recovery Network describes themselves as matchmakers for local businesses who want to donate surplus food with agencies that offer food support programs. Have a look.
Riverview Country Market in Charlottetown is one of the newest members of the PEI Food Recovery Network, looking for a way to get surplus produce to people who need it.
It's sometimes just like minor mistakes on our part ordering, or sometimes the supplier accidentally sends too much stuff. So it's like, let's get this food to people who need it and deserve it, especially fresh food.
The app lets businesses say what they have to offer and when and where an agency can pick it up.
All of the information is right there. It's not a thread of horrible emails or phone calls that you can't get the right person on the phone. It's very simple and it's efficient.
Emily Browning is reaching out to all kinds of island businesses that may potentially have excess food in their operations, including warehouses, farmers, restaurants, and cafes. According to Second Harvest, almost 60% of food produced in Canada, about 35.5 million metric tons, is wasted annually. On PEI, it's more than 23 million kilograms every year.
It's really sad to hear how much food is going to waste that is perfectly good, perfectly edible, and should be distributed to the communities.
Browning says since the Food Recovery Network launched in January, it has rescued more than 60,000 kilograms of food. Some of it has made it here to the community fridge in Charlottetown.
Every day maybe we will get a notification from them. It's always really good to get it, and we can fill up the fridge, and a lot of people use it, and it's just really helping everyone in the community.
Browning says there's also an environmental benefit to the food rescue.
When food is wasted, it usually goes to a landfill, and in the landfills it emits greenhouse gases. So by averting the food waste back into the hands of people in our community, we're also reducing the greenhouse gas emissions.
Browning says so far the Food Recovery Network is working with 22 food donors to support 26 agencies, and the goal is to grow that number as word of the program spreads. Nancy Russell, CBC News, Charlottetown.
After 34 days of war, this may be the first moment there's hope of de-escalation. Russia has announced it will reduce its operations in Ukraine's north, notably around the capital, Kyiv, its latest result of ongoing peace talks. But Ukraine's president is skeptical. Salima Shivji shows us how, for some in Ukraine, there's still more reason for fear than hope.
Hundreds of kilometers from the peace talks, survival is top of mind for the millions of Ukrainians displaced. Air raid sirens, even in the relatively calm west of the country, shatter the quiet. The fear of more bombs is ever present. Snezhana Shevchenko is just days from giving birth. My mind is scarred by the bombing, she says. I'm terrified the shelling will hit again, even here. What she escaped, she calls hell. Kharkiv is in ruins after enduring near constant bombing for weeks, like Mariupol in the south, battered and burned, and nearby Mykolaiv, the target of a missile strike that killed at least a dozen people. It's a world away from Istanbul, where after a more than 2-week pause, the negotiating table was again full. 4 hours of talks, leading to Ukraine's negotiating team offering to remain neutral, to not join military alliances like NATO, but only if the country's security is guaranteed by countries like Canada or Turkey. Russia's response was a promise to radically reduce its attacks on Kyiv and other parts of Ukraine's north. It was presented as a gesture of goodwill to move talks forward, only it comes as Russian troops were already stalled on the outskirts of the capital. Pushed back by Ukrainian forces, a promise that could be a ploy to retreat and regroup, some analysts say. And whether Russia will even do what it says it will is doubtful, say Western leaders, skeptical and wary.
We'll see. I don't read anything into it until I see what their actions are. We'll see if they follow through on what they're suggesting.
There was a lot more progress coming out of these talks than anyone expected going in. Still, it's far too early for much optimism on a day of missile strikes and heavy fighting on several fronts. Salima Shivji, CBC News, Lviv.
A memorial service was held today for Prince Philip. The Queen's husband died last year in April at the age of 99. His funeral was kept quite small at the time, just 30 guests because of COVID restrictions. But today, about 1,800 people joined the Queen and the royal family to remember the Duke of Edinburgh. The Queen's appearance at Westminster Abbey dispelled some concerns about her health. She recently recovered from COVID-19 and has some unspecified mobility problems. The Queen and the Prince were married for 73 years. Philip was well known for hating a fuss, and today's ceremony lasted less than an hour. After large increases in hospitalizations over the weekend, BC is reporting another drop today. Positive patients in hospital are down 15 from 288 yesterday, and critical care down by at least 2 people. 1 more person from the Northern Health region has died. The province's vaccine rates continue to stall. More than 40% of eligible British Columbians have not gotten their 3rd shot. Now, despite that, the push for more vaccines continues. U.S. regulators have authorized a 4th dose of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines for Americans 50 and older today. As Christine Birak reports, with restrictions eased across Canada, there are questions about who should be eligible here and when.
With diabetes and trouble breathing, Heidi Schwendy wants another COVID shot.
I would take a 4th dose any day. Tomorrow if I could.
U.S. health authorities now say 4th doses may be administered to individuals 50 years of age and older. In Canada, it's only immunocompromised patients over 12. Some provinces include residents in long-term care, and Quebec's now offering 4th doses to all seniors over 80.
Where the evidence is strong, then a recommendation is made.
Researchers in Israel studied the medical records of more than 500,000 seniors. Early results suggest the death rate from Omicron was 78% lower in those who received a fourth Pfizer dose compared with those who received just 3 shots. Experts say 4 shots may make sense for vulnerable seniors, but less than half of Canadians have even had 3 doses.
Evidence is showing that the benefits of receiving a third dose compared to a second dose are more substantial than the benefits of receiving a fourth dose.
An American study examining vaccine effectiveness of 3 shots against hospitalization found Moderna and Pfizer still offer nearly 80% protection 4 months later.
It's something that people are clearly watching.
Immunity from vaccines and natural infection will wane in the coming months, but experts insist 3 doses will still offer most Canadians strong protection over the summer.
In my view, a lot of the necessity of the fourth dose is also going to have to do with how much SARS coronavirus 2 is circulating in the community.
A surge in infections will likely happen in the fall when people move back indoors. Some doctors expect that is when fourth doses will likely be recommended for all Canadians. Christine Burak, CBC News, Toronto.
When you gotta go, but often there's a big problem. There's nowhere to do the deed. Why there's a serious lack of public washrooms. Next.
I would say that black-faced Jew right in the center there, yes, will probably no doubt lamb either this evening or sometime through the night.
Harold Threlkeld's family has been raising sheep in the Okanagan Valley for more than 80 years. Greg Young has been around sheep for less than 80 days.
They should be all pretty good.
And just your dusting and foot baths.
Yeah.
Young is training to be a shepherd, a big change for this laid-off sawmill worker.
No, I never did dream of it before, but it's kind of a job that a person waits for, once-in-a-lifetime kind of job. And
This summer, Young will take a flock to the clear cuts in the nearby mountains. The sheep eat the weedy bushes and trees that choke out commercially valuable seedlings. Properly managed, the sheep do a great job, but Threlkeld has had trouble in the past.
When you take a fellow that has never been around sheep, put him on the clear-cut mountains, first of all, he has to get used to the mountains. Next, he's got to learn to camp properly, and the next thing is, well, the first thing should be his sheep, you know.
Now, back in the old days, finding properly trained shepherds was not a problem. There were more sheep and more people who worked with them. Today, if sheep are going to be the friend of the forester, more people are going to have to learn the art of shepherding.
So we'll go and we'll fix that right now.
Lance Underwood is teaching that art at the Armstrong Rodeo Grounds. His students are 15 unemployed workers, none of whom have ever worked with sheep before. A federal government training program gave them the chance.
Lie down. Lie down.
You lie down next time. Got it?
When the dog was lying down and you made it lie down, you got after it.
Yeah.
And as soon as you walked away,
ran away,
the dog got up and left because you've taught it to do that.
In 17 weeks, they learned to work with dogs and horses, take classes in botany, and uncover the mysteries of animals that the ancient Egyptians revered as gods. Sheep are not gods, but these people can now say to themselves, "That ewes thrill me."
I used to make jokes about shepherds and sheep like everybody else, you know. But I never thought for 1 minute I'd be doing it myself. Now, those jokes ain't so funny anymore.
It's just to be out underneath the stars, and I may be dead tired, but I'll probably be glad that I'll be there.
It's not all poetry and stuff like that. There's a lot of hands-on experience, and you've got a production goal. You've got.
But there's got to be some poetry too, though.
Oh, absolutely. It's working outdoors and having a job. that's part of it.
That's poetry. That's poetry.
You know, I mean.
Come on, boy. Come on, Bruin.
Some of the dogs might not be ready in time for the spring grazing, but all the students will be. After this course, they really do know that little lambs eat ivy. For the CBC Evening News, I'm Bob Nixon in Armstrong.
Today, we launch a new series on CBC from Creator Network regular Upei Lee. He's exploring the issues in our community that impact us every single day. And in part one, he tackles a big but largely unspoken problem in cities everywhere. It's about a lack of public bathrooms.
This ever happened to you? You're making your way downtown, walking fast, faces pass, and nature calls. So now you're walking really fast because you really need to find a bathroom. And the problem?
Well, if you're anywhere in North America, that is a very difficult task. Ugh. So, to be clear, the public bathroom that I'm talking about is one that is accessible to anyone for free. Not if you buy a coffee or a donut, not if you ask really nicely, free. And cities across North America really struggle to provide them.
They're annoyingly missing in places you'd expect them. Public spaces, busy streets, and transit stations. The few that are free to use almost always close in the evening and aren't easy to find unless you know exactly where to go. Case in point, in my hometown of Vancouver, there is just one bathroom across the entire transit system. Just one. Located here at Waterfront Station. And you think it'd be somewhere convenient, like, oh, I don't know, the lobby? But no, to get to this one bathroom, you have to go through the fare gates, across a pedestrian bridge, down a set of escalators, through a tunnel, past another set of gates, and if you haven't peed yourself already, you'll find it in the back corner.
Yeah, it's a real pain in the butt.
I'm sorry about that, but I imagine you can relate. This is a problem pretty much anywhere you go across North America. If you're looking for a bathroom, you're better off going into a cafe, a fast food restaurant, or a bush.
But this isn't the case everywhere.
In Paris, the city of love and lavatories, there are over 400 freestanding public bathrooms across the city. In London, almost half the tube stations have a public bathroom, which adds a whole new meaning to the term tube station. And in Tokyo, public bathrooms are not only plentiful, they are often beautiful works of art, winning prizes and international recognition the world over. Like, oh wow, you seeing this?
So what's the deal? What's stopping us from providing more public bathrooms? Well, to some extent, the answer is pretty simple. It's money.
Public bathrooms are surprisingly expensive, not just to buy, but to install. Each one needs connections to electricity, running water, sewage pipes, and the durability to withstand Canadian winters. This easily adds up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. In Vancouver, the Park Board recently made headlines for budgeting $645,000 for a single toilet, which might sound insane, but that's just how much they cost. Montreal spent over $500,000 on one of these bad boys, while Toronto got theirs for $450,000. A relative bargain, I guess. But building a bathroom is also just a fraction of the total cost. Once you've opened a public bathroom, congratulations, now you get to maintain and clean it indefinitely. It's a cost that typically amounts to tens of thousands of dollars per toilet every year. And it makes sense. If you think your 3 roommates can't keep a toilet clean, try hundreds to thousands of different people every day.
But money isn't the whole story. After all, we justify high costs for plenty of other things, many of them arguably less useful than a bathroom. There's another issue here.
The truth of the matter is that public bathrooms can be more than just places to use the toilets. According to a research paper from the University of Toronto, vandalism, drug use, and sexual activity are named as leading reasons for the closure of existing public toilets and the reluctance to provide additional ones. I don't think that should surprise too many people. Public bathrooms can be kind of gritty, and sometimes they are the scene of serious incidents. In 2018, there were 23 overdose deaths recorded in public bathrooms across British Columbia.
Those are genuine concerns many people have about public bathrooms, and in some cities, that has led to an interesting solution.
Allow me to introduce you to the APT, the Automated Public Toilet. It's a sensor-filled, button-activated robot toilet from the future. This toilet cleans itself after each use, while the structure enforces a time limit for how long you can stay inside it. On top of that, many of these toilets are built by private corporations who pay for these toilets by selling advertising on them. That's right, your flush is now brought to you by neoliberalism.
So with APTs, corporations take care of the cost, while technology makes sure these bathrooms are used as intended. Problem solved, right? Well, perhaps in theory, but in practice, these APTs have been anything but perfect. It turns out the automatic cleaning system is still no match for a human being that's determined to make a mess, and relying on corporations to provide them often means they get the bare minimum amount of maintenance. What you often end up with instead is a very expensive toilet with all the same issues of a traditional one. Case in point, Seattle. After spending over $5 million on 5 APTs, the city eventually shut them all down because they were filthy and not being used as intended. The bathrooms themselves ended up being sold on eBay. So at this point, I would understand if you thought it was basically impossible to provide a usable public bathroom. But hear me out, I don't think that's actually the issue here. There's something I began to notice while putting this video together. Public bathrooms are gritty because they are rarely well maintained. I looked into this. A typical public bathroom gets cleaned once to twice a day. Meanwhile, a bathroom in a restaurant, which limits its use to its patrons, gets cleaned up to 10 times a day and is constantly supervised. The results really speak for themselves. So at the end of the day, it really does come down to money. High-quality public bathrooms are absolutely possible through frequent maintenance and cleaning. But cities just don't seem to prioritize this. And why is that? Well, I think that's where we get to the very root of this issue. In most cities, there are laws that require certain businesses to provide bathrooms for customers. Typically, those businesses are restaurants, cafes, and gas stations. That has created a de facto network of bathrooms and businesses across the city that can be accessed by the public. And because of that, cities have been able to offload much of the responsibility of taking care of our private business to the private sector. That is an inconvenient system, sure, but for most of us, it's ultimately one that we can tolerate. We have bathrooms in our homes, in our workplaces, and in a pinch, inside a business. Public bathrooms are a nice to have, but not a necessity. I think this is ultimately why public bathrooms suck in North America. Cities here developed with the understanding that toilets are a private responsibility, and that has allowed governments to put in the bare minimum amount of effort into providing the public ones. But this creates a disturbing dynamic. Because most of us have access to clean private bathrooms while our public bathrooms tend to be disgusting, that has led many to stigmatize public bathrooms and those who use them, which makes the problem much worse. It turns out one of the biggest barriers to building a public bathroom is actually because neighboring businesses and residents actively resist them being built nearby. It's not that they don't want public bathrooms, they don't want the people associated with them. The truth is, we have a pretty long history of finding ways to exclude underprivileged groups of people from certain public areas, like these benches that keep you from lying down on them, or these heat vents with spikes. Our lack of public bathrooms is sadly a part of this tradition. Urban theorist Mike Davis argues that public toilets are the real front line of the city's war on the homeless. But I can't stress this enough. That approach has widespread consequences. Children, pregnant people, senior citizens, and those with certain medical conditions need to use bathrooms frequently. For them, a lack of public bathrooms can be a huge barrier to leaving their home. Professions like taxi drivers, food delivery workers, and local urban planning videographers suffer from a lack of public toilets too. The average person pees 6 to 8 times a day, so it's really not practical for workers in these industries to pay for a coffee or a donut every time they have to relieve themselves. Many taxi and Uber drivers report peeing in bottles instead to get through the day. But perhaps the most seriously affected are the homeless. For them, a public bathroom is really the only reliable option they have to relieve themselves and practice basic hygiene. When there are none available, they often have no other choice but to relieve themselves on the street. And that can have widespread implications. In San Diego, an outbreak of hepatitis A that killed 25 people was linked back to fecal matter in public places. A grand jury report investigating the outbreak found that the primary problem was that the homeless did not have access to public toilets. For me, this highlights a huge flaw with our current system. By relying on businesses to provide bathrooms for the public, we have created serious gaps for those who need public bathrooms the most, all while creating a public health risk for everyone.
And it's not that businesses don't have a role to play in providing bathrooms. Like, yeah, if you have a space that convenes lots of people together, you probably should have a bathroom available. But if that logic applies to a restaurant or a gas station, why shouldn't it apply to a transit station or a public space?
It doesn't matter where you are. When you have to go, you have to go. In those moments, you realize that bathrooms are a necessity. So maybe it's about time we started treating them that way.
A huge problem for sure. And I must say, as a woman, perhaps an even bigger problem. Not as easy to go just anywhere. And as news reporters out in the field, there are often a lot of jokes about how, you just hold it, sometimes for 5 or 6 hours. So here's hoping things change. After a wet winter, things are looking up for farmers on the prairies. But the long-term outlook is far less dependable. Why that is, coming up. At 6:45 tonight, a live look at the Strait Eugene Golf Resort outside of Cranbrook tonight. A gorgeous day in the East Kootenays and more warm spring weather to come. Nick has your full forecast coming up.
In the year 2050, how will BC look? From agriculture to cities, how will climate change life? Don't miss 2050 Degrees of Change, a CBC Vancouver original podcast, now available.
Climate change will have a profound effect on our land as summers grow hotter and winters become shorter. For Canadian farmers, especially in the prairies, it could mean more frequent droughts. And while there may also be more precipitation, how and when it rains can make a big difference. CBC meteorologist Christy Clemenaga explains.
You've probably heard scientists say that we will likely see more droughts in the prairies as our climate changes. But why is that? Well, there are a couple of reasons. First, while we'll likely see more precipitation overall, timing is a factor. We'll see more of that precipitation in winter and spring with more rain and less snow. While that might sound appealing, snow is actually a natural storage for water and can replenish soils gradually as it melts. Less snow means less storage, and to make matters worse, winter rains can form an icy layer on top of the frozen ground that can further reduce absorption. And in the summer, when we really need the rain, we'll probably see more of those big storms that flood landscapes as opposed to those gentle soaking rains we like to see. And with all the hot weather, expect more evaporation, so a lot of that water won't even stick around. Now, the good news is, as our climate changes, so do we. We've come a long way since, say, the dirty 30s at preparing for droughts and adapting our farming practices to get our crops the moisture they need.
As someone who comes from a farming family here in BC, I sure get that. Rain is complex, important, but also scary, as we've seen this year, Nick.
You're absolutely right, Anita. And actually, I mean, I was saying earlier on to some of my colleagues here that the forecast models this year didn't seem to be doing as well. And I think a lot of that has to do with just this variability in the weather, right? I mean, they take into account a number of different factors. But interestingly this year, I mean, we've seen these extremes in weather. Of course, we had the forest fires earlier on this year. We had some pretty extreme cold back in December. And these ups and downs, I mean, you're seeing that even in the forecast models. And that just goes to what Christy was talking about. So difficulty in predicting some of these systems moving forward. And unfortunately, that is becoming our new reality. For today's weather, a little bit more predictable, if you will. I mean, we're just looking at a few showers. It's just kind of moving in across the coast right now. It's part of a sort of a weak system that's pushing across, although we've got wind warnings up toward the north coast. For the Vancouver area, really what we're looking at is just some showers starting later this evening, so really closer to the midnight hour, and then lasting through the overnight. By tomorrow morning, it's going to be a little bit wet. We're looking at showers moving across the lower mainland. They'll kind of clear out, although if you're in areas closer to, say, Hope, we're still expecting to see rain showers throughout the day tomorrow. Not a lot of rain, but on and off throughout the day. Into tomorrow night, things begin to peter out, and then by Thursday morning, just a little bit of lingering cloud cover. By Thursday afternoon, a mix of sun and cloud once again. And this is sort of that break in the rain before yet another system moves through on Friday. You'll notice in the 5-day forecast, sort of go rain, sun, rain, sun, rain, sun. That's kind of the story here moving through the next few. Not a lot of rain. We're looking at about 5 to 10 millimeters, generally speaking, across the area. Anywhere from, for the most part, Victoria up through Metro Vancouver and out toward Abbotsford, we're expecting to see rain showers clearing out by the afternoon. Further up the Fraser, though, it's going to last through the better part of the day. Not much to speak of in terms of the winds. The Strait of Georgia, though, could see wind gusts up to about 40 kilometers per hour. Otherwise, 20 kilometers per hour is what we're looking at for the most part. Forecast-wise across the region, we're starting to see some instability building. Kamloops actually likely to see some thunderstorms through the afternoon. Temperatures round about the seasonal mark, and certainly that's the case as we zoom in a little bit closer here. Showers clearing out toward the afternoon, pushing their way eastward across the region. The bigger picture, as I had mentioned yesterday, there's your one system. Then we've got a little bit of a break with high pressure building in, and yet another one coming for Friday. So that's kind of the story that plays out, and there you go. Tomorrow, rain showers, but a mix of sun and cloud for the afternoon. Same story into Thursday. A little cooler and rainy on Friday. Saturday looks good, and increasing cloud cover with showers again for Sunday.
Okay, a bit of a mixed bag.
Yeah, something for everybody, right?
Yeah, for sure. We can take that. Thanks, Nick.
You bet.
We know that humans love a good tune, but do animals? Can they groove, sing, and dance? Why Snowball the cockatoo is proving that a love of music isn't purely for people.
The official name of the project is Sputnik 1. It's very complicated. There's a lot of requirements from things like CSA and NASA as well.
When you really think that, okay, this is going to be launched and we're actually going to have it orbiting and sending photos back, it's pretty exciting.
Today we're doing a progress review with the Upei team for the Cubesat Sputnik. And so basically we're doing this with all the 15 teams that are participating in the CCP project. And the intent here is to kind of support the team, but also evaluate the status of the progress because launch is coming soon. On the plan, we have at least 2 Cubesat that's going to be launched in August, and the rest of them will be launched at the end of the year, most probably end of December, maybe early January.
It's been pretty exciting. We've had, I want to say, somewhere around 40 students involved on and off throughout the last 4 years. Who've contributed to the project and going from the idea to now having some prototypes.
And we have what's called a 2U CubeSat, and that's essentially 10 by 10 by 20 centimeters. So it's the size of 2 Rubik's Cubes glued together, essentially.
We have multiple subsystems that all have to be integrated and actually be designed in a way that they can operate in the vacuum and temperature conditions of space.
Our CubeSat's going to allow us to take pictures of PEI while it's in space, and those pictures are going to be used for precision agriculture purposes.
The level of complexity of the design and the prototyping required really help show our students what the space industry is like.
So I'm working on the attitude determination and control system of the Cubesat satellite. It's essentially for orienting the spacecraft to point towards PEI while it's in space.
We'll have the Cubesat, but also a ground station here at UPEI that we'll see in place on the roof. So it'll be pretty exciting once all this is up and running.
They have such a great enthusiasm in building those Cubesat that it makes it much easier for us to work with them because we feel the excitement.
I've got a very big passion for different things like control systems and electronic design, and I found that this project really could encompass all of it.
Eventually, we want those students to flood the space industry in Canada and be ready to put their hands on other space projects.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
On April 7th, join CBC Vancouver's Anita Bathe and a panel of entrepreneurs at a free online UBC Dialogues discussion about how to cultivate an entrepreneurial mindset and succeed in business. And get Metro Vancouver news that matters to you wherever you are with the free CBC News app. Download it today and stay connected to where you live.
Okay, before we go tonight, The Nature of Things is into its 61st season, and one of the latest episodes asks the question, are animals musical? And we know humans can certainly groove out to tunes, maybe not me, but most people. So what about other species? Turns out it's not just us. Take a look at this cockatoo named Snowball.
We noticed that after our initial study, Snowball was starting to do some new moves. And we wanted to capture and study the diversity of those.
A colleague helped analyze Snowball's movements the way a choreographer would. Together, they discovered 14 distinct dance moves that Snowball was performing.
Snowball showed this striking parallel to what humans do when they engage physically with music. We try different things. We maybe copy each other, or sometimes we invent stuff. It seems like maybe all of that is going on in this other distantly related animal.
This is uncommonly sophisticated behavior. Snowball isn't dancing to survive or to mate or to be fed. It seems like Snowball is dancing because he just wants to have fun.
Of course, you can watch the rest of Snowball's dancing routines on CBC Gem. Headbang with lifted foot, that's got to be my favorite. Where were you in my clubbing days, Snowball? Where were you? That's it for CBC Vancouver News tonight. Have a wonderful evening.